Good day. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day, and welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by American Jewish Committee. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. On Sunday night, two anti-Semitic terrorists opened fire on a Hanukkah celebration in Bondi Beach, killing at least 15 and injuring dozens more. The attack comes at a time when Australia has seen an unprecedented rise in violent anti-Semitism, including firebombings, graffiti, physical attacks, and more. Joining us to unpack the impact of this tragedy and its implications for Australia and the broader Jewish community are Nick Aronson, Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor to Australia's Special Envoy to Combat Anti-Semitism, Joel Burnie, Executive Manager of the Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council, and Hannah Rudolph, Associate Director of AJC's Asia Pacific Institute. Moderating our conversation today is AJC's Senior Vice President of Diplomatic Affairs, Daniel Silver. After we hear from our guests, time permitting, we will take your questions. You may email your questions to questions@ajc.org. Questions is plural, or you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claire and Joel, Nick, and Hannah. Thank you so much for joining us. As Claire said, under these unfortunate circumstances, I know we're coming together in this moment that is truly heartbreaking. It's devastating, but it's also urgent. What happened at Bondi wasn't just another headline. It was a brutal reminder that anti-Semitism is a real and growing threat, which I know we'll talk about, and that when it's confronted early and seriously, if it's not confronted early and seriously, then it turns to violence. And many of us, and Joel, I know you will speak to this, it's something that you've warned about for a long time. But we, AJC, are here in solidarity with the Australian Jewish community, with the global Jewish community, but we're also here because there's real need, I think, for action. This isn't about statements or moving on. It's about understanding what failed, what has to change, and what governments need to do now, not just to protect the Jewish communities, but to protect society as a whole. I know that AJC, and Hannah will discuss this as well, is engaging across our global network today and always, but with partners in Australia, with AJAC, with the Special Envoy's Office, with governments and with Jewish communities around the world, because what happened in Bondi is part of a much bigger pattern. Security matters, but it's not enough. Truly, anti-Semitism has to be confronted at its roots because before it escalates even further. So today, as Claire mentioned in her introduction, we have brought together voices who are living this moment, who have been warning about it, and who are working on what comes next. So I expect this to be, I hope, an honest and action-focused conversation. And then at the end, we'll be joined by our CEO, AJC CEO Ted Deutsch, who will offer some concluding reflections. So with that, Joel, I'll start with you first. The attack has been described as both the darkest day in Australian history and one of the darkest days, in Australian Jewish history, and one of the darkest days in Australia's history, period. How is the community, the Jewish community in Australia, experiencing this moment emotionally, psychologically, in terms of the daily life? And if you're able, Joel, how has this tragedy touched you personally, your family, your friends, and your colleagues?
Well, thank you very much for having me. And it's just great to be here with our AJC family. And we all know of the very close relationship that my organization, AJAC, has with AJC over many, many decades. And it's just a privilege to be with you all today. I wish that it was under different circumstances. It's a very hard question to answer because there's just so many emotions that we're feeling right now. We feel the obvious emotion of deep sadness, the loss of life, and the volume and the way that it happened is just so tragic. I've had the privilege of traveling to Israel 10 times in the past 2 years. Part of my role is to take non-Jewish politicians and journalists and diplomats and other Australian officials to Israel, and I've taken many of them in a post-October 7 environment. And the most chilling way to describe what happened on Sunday is to actually just compare the footage. Compare the footage of the day of October 7 of the people running in the Nova Festival away from the machine gun fire is the same images of the people running away on the sands of Bondi on Sunday. The way that the two terrorists were loading their guns and taking pot shots through their scopes, identifying Jews and killing them in cold blood, is exactly the same way that the Hamas terrorists who came over and besieged the south of Israel on October 7, 2023, massacred over 1,100 people in Israel. It was all the same. And the tragic thing is that for the past 2 years, we as the organized Jewish community have been warning about this. And we've been warning that if the governments, both at the state and federal level, allow this toxic rhetoric and language that has permeated the pro-Palestinian advocacy movement to continue unabated on the streets of mainly Melbourne and Sydney, but other cities around Australia. If the violent rhetoric continued, we warned them that things were going to escalate and things were going to get worse. And indeed, over a 2-year period, we were right at every corner. We warned them that it was going to escalate, and it did. It went from vandalism. It went to firebombings. It went to burning down synagogues. Still then, the government was unable to get a hold on what was going on here. So an overwhelming sense in my community now is moving from sorrow, sadness to the deep tragedy and the fact that we are going to have to bury so many people over the next couple of days. But the community now is turning into anger. And it's turning into anger not just because of the ineptitude and the failures of this current government. The Prime Minister himself still cannot take responsibility that this tragedy happened on his watch. He lists the things that he's done and he's instituted, all the great things that he's done. And there are many. Of course, there are many. But did it work? Did it save the 15 innocent people that were killed? So why read the list out? Why go through every little bit and piece that you've done to defend yourself and defend your actions when it's clear from an unemotional and non-political point of view that 15 innocent people are dead? And if the Prime Minister of Australia is not responsible for the safety of his citizens, then who is? And over the past 3 days, the response by this Prime Minister has been disgusting. He hasn't met with the wider Jewish community. He held a cocktail party last night for a handful of select ones. The messaging is very, very curated. He does not want to be heckled by the Jewish community. So in his cowardice, he's avoiding us. He did the same after October 7. It took him 4.5 days to present to a Jewish audience. I was there. 4.5 days after the massacre to address the Australian Jewish community in 2023. He was working on his backhand at the Cottesloe Tennis Club when the Adus Synagogue burnt down on December 6 last year. Didn't come back for it. Took him 4 days again to come to or 3 or 4 days to come to the synagogue to offer his solidarity with our people. And still now, 72 hours after a horrific massacre, the worst terror attack in Australia history, the worst terror attack on Jewish people globally since the horrific massacre of October 7, and within the context of the explosion of antisemitism that we have all experienced since, he still hasn't said sorry. He still hasn't said that this happened on his watch. And even though he, in his mind, has tried hard to quash this and stop this from happening, he cannot admit that he failed. There was a Muslim man who saved a number of Jewish lives on Sunday. His name is Ahmed Al-Ahmed. He's not only a devout Muslim, but he's a great Australian, and he's a hero. And the Prime Minister went to see him yesterday, and that's a good thing, because Ahmed Al-Ahmed is an example that not all is lost in Australia. As distraught as we are in the political class, it's a reminder that Australians are good people, that the silent majority, as silent as they've been for the past 2 years, is there, and their hearts and minds are with us. But in encouraging the Prime Minister and supporting the Prime Minister and meeting Ahmed Al-Ahmed at his hospital bedside yesterday, the Prime Minister is still yet to meet with any Jewish patients that are still recovering in hospital. So an AJAC colleague of mine who's about to start as the head of the AJAC Sydney office in the first week of January, Arsen Ostrovsky, he was shot in the head. If the bullet was a millimeter to the other side, he'd no longer be with us right now. He's still in hospital, recovering from surgery that he had yesterday. The Prime Minister's office has my number. Prime Minister has my number. He hasn't called. He hasn't sought to see Arsen or any of the other Jews that are patients inside the hospital, nothing. So in terms of where my own personal reflection is right now, and my emotions are constantly in flux, no less because of the fatigue of doing whatever we can to support and advocate for our community. My main emotion waking up after the 3 hours of sleep this morning is anger. The Prime Minister doesn't understand what's going on. He cannot place himself in our shoes due to the rigidity of his ideology. And because of that, he is ill-equipped and unable to sort out this toxin in our society. And I fear, with trying very hard with all of my might not to be alarmist, that my fear is that on his watch, what happened on Sunday is bound to happen again.
Thank you, Joel. And we'll get into shortly the responsibility and government response piece of this and dive a bit more deeply into that. But Nick, I want your your perspective as well. You're based in Australia, living in this moment. Um, from your vantage point, professionally, personally, how has this attack landed for you, and what are you seeing and hearing in the days since Bondi, and how this has shaken Australian society more broadly?
Thanks, Daniel. Starting with the more broad response, I live less than 2 miles from Bondi Beach, um, and have been down there a couple of times since the attack. I echo Joel's sentiment that that there's a lot of emotions coming through the community right now. Heartbreak, absolutely, absolute shock. There's a lot of things. Anger, white hot anger, as you can see from Joel, is shared amongst the community. But the one thing that isn't there is surprise. I had this conversation, funnily enough, Joel, yesterday with the Prime Minister. There's something about thoughts and prayers that is entirely inadequate in a situation like this. And so if I look at the community is drawing a lot of strength from the thousands and thousands and thousands of messages that we're getting from not only members of our community and members of the Jewish community around the world, but our neighbors, people. I'm getting messages from people who I worked with 30 years ago and haven't spoken to in 30 years. So from that sense, the community is drawing a lot of strength from the coming together of the broader Australian community, but there is still a seething white hot anger. There is fear. We've been a bit of an outpost from our perspective, in that we've watched the descent into violence in much of the rest of the world. And Joel's right. We've been calling it out for 2 years that we're on a continuum, and words lead to actions, and actions are going to lead to people being hurt. Did we expect it would be a mass casualty event like this? No, of course not. But at the same time, we've sat here and we've watched this play out in other places in the world and gone, we're different, we're protected. This is Australia. It's one of the safest places on earth. And what's clear is that, I'm gonna kind of lean back into a bit of a cliche here. The words globalize the intifada actually mean globalize the intifada. It means kill Jews wherever they are. And there is no safe place. And that's certainly the feeling in the Jewish community. We've already had, a couple of Hanukkah events cancelled. We've obviously gone into complete lockdown. Like I said, I live right near the beach. I had helicopters circling, not my house, obviously, but circling the area pretty well all night last night. This is not the Australia that any of us are used to, but unfortunately, I think it's the Australia that it is right now. It's horrific, but it's not surprising.
So, Joel, you were blunt that the government failed to act on repeated warnings. Where specifically did you see this leadership fall short before the incident in Bondi Beach?
So the gloves are off now, and this is the message that we all have to adopt. We have to stop our Jewish trait and desire to be open, to be intellectual, to be philosophical, and to be broad, to not do broad strokes and say, oh, not all pro-Palestinian supporters are anti-Semitic. We have to stop and we have to call out for what it is. The pro-Palestinian movement, or the things within the pro-Palestinian movement that we all are exposed to in the public, is too binary. You're a pro-Palestinian, so you have to be viciously anti-Israel. And unfortunately, the binary nature of their advocacy movement is adopted by the supporters of that advocacy movement. Anthony Albanese is not an anti-Semite. Anthony Albanese does not wake up in the morning thinking that he hates Jews. But Anthony Albanese is and has historically been a very keen supporter of the Palestinian cause. That within himself, even without his intention or even without him knowing it, compromises his ability because his view of everything in that context is too binary. And since that time, this happened because of the protest movements on the streets. If anyone in government wants to point fingers at me and say, no, protesting a genocide is a noble pursuit, this has got nothing to do with that. I was the one that warned you about it. And it happened after my warnings, and you're saying to me as the Jew that I don't know what's up and what's down? I was proven right. And now I'm still not allowed to tell you that the violent language from those protests that he allowed, because of the binary acceptance of how the pro-Palestinian movement is created and structured, Anthony Albanese was unable to see the connection between the two. He was unable to understand that by calling out little kids in the streets of Melbourne and Sydney saying all Zionists are terrorists, Kaiba Kaiba Yal Yahud, from the river to the sea, globalize the intifada, death to the IDF, free speech, he says. Why? Because he would not allow himself, as a supporter of the Palestinian cause, to be able to identify the problem. Because if I said to you, if I could ask for one thing of the government today, no more protests. If they cannot utilize language that is not inciting violence, does not marginalize and dehumanize Jews, they have no right to be on the streets. Is he going to do that? No. Why? Because of free speech? Because he's some type of free speech warrior of the left? No. It's because he believes in their cause, and because he believes in their cause and accepts the binary nature, pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, he cannot see that there is a nuanced pathway in between. And so it was that genesis of that original failure to be unable to connect the dots as to what was going on. This is the inaction. He has government ministers in December of 2023, including the current Home Affairs Minister. He was asked a question, is Israel committing a genocide? Well, if you look at this and then if you look at that, you might come to that conclusion, but that's not the type of language that I'd be using. What do you think that you're using that type of language and then you're sort of wiggling around it? And then we have to also accept the fact that there are 1 million Muslims in this country. There are 100,000 Jews. We as Jews, like all Jews around in the diaspora, like to live amongst each other. So we live in a very, very centralized and concentrated geographical area. Now, for all of your listeners and viewers, the Australian political system, we have a compulsory voting system. Everyone has to vote. Everyone. The turnout is about 93% of the vote. So if you only are concentrated in a very small geographical region like the Jews like to do, it reduces your political power because you're only concentrated in certain congressional style districts, right? The Muslim community is more spread out. They hold value and majority in large populations in many, many more seats. So from an electoral perspective, the Labor Party made a conscious decision, including their behavior in the past 72 hours, to look after their 1 million Muslim voters, right? And it's this constant politicization of everything that is bringing us to this point. Still now, after the innocent deaths of 15 people, it hasn't jolted the Prime Minister to understand this is not about politics anymore. This is not about votes. This is not about winning elections. This is not about getting more money from different constituencies. This is about right and wrong. And this is about what we stand for as a country. Right? We are a young country, but we are a proud country. We stand for something. We mean something. And to allow this because of politics, because of ideology, and still now after 15 innocent people were gunned down, he still can't jolt to understand that his inaction or what he tried to do wasn't enough. Still, he can't comprehend. Now he's trying to shift the conversation away. He's trying to defend his actions. He's trying to say, oh, look, Ahmed al-Ahmed's a Muslim, so, it's not a Muslim problem. He has not addressed Islamist ideology and Islamist terrorism. He hasn't said that he's going to have a review into the Islamic curriculum to see exactly what anti-Semitic hatred is spewed there. He says, oh, we've introduced anti-hate laws, anti-hate speech laws. Okay, great. How many prosecutions, Mr. Prime Minister? How many arrests of Islamic preachers, who have been calling for death of Jews for the past 2 years? Nothing. Zero. And you want to take credit for that? 15 people are dead. Well, when are we going to come around to the fact that it happened on your watch, regardless of your ideology, you're culpable. But still now, he can't do it.
Hannah, I want to bring you in here. AJC's Asia Pacific Institute, and Joel mentioned this at the top, led by our CEO, Ted Deutsch, was in Australia this September, just a few months ago. While I know you weren't there on the ground, your team made explicit warnings with Joel and his team to political leaders, law enforcement, about the consequences of allowing these anti-Semitic, this rhetoric and demonstration to go unchecked. And I'm sure while the delegation was there, what was happening, as Joel explained, was happening on the streets, probably just outside of the rooms that they were meeting in. But AJC has seen this pattern before, the rhetoric escalating into real world violence in Europe, in the United States. So based on what AJC leadership raised with Australian officials, I have to imagine, Hannah, that there were elements that felt alarmingly familiar when you saw what happened at Bondi Beach.
Yeah, just for context, through AJC's Asia Pacific Institute, we've had a really close relationship with AJAC for almost 30 years. So we went to Australia as partners in order to amplify the concerns, the alarms that AJAC has been raising about the spike in anti-Semitism, over 2,000 incidents in the year following October 7th. But even before September, we had Joel on our stage at AJC Global Forum in April. We've been really trying to amplify the message of the Australian Jewish community that action needs to be taken now, that it's the alarm bells are ringing, things need to be done. So we went to Melbourne, to Sydney, to Canberra in order to share the message that the American Jewish community, the US, the global Jewish community is standing alongside the Australian Jewish community in our concerns for what is going on. And AJC, as all of our listeners know, we were horrified and heartbroken in May outside of an AJC event when a beautiful young couple was gunned down in anti-Semitic violence. We have personal history with seeing how anti-Semitic rhetoric very quickly leads to the incitement of the violence that it spews. And so our message to Australian officials, exactly like Joel has been saying, was that the pathway is very clear. You have to act now. And as Nick said, that's why Ted's message has been that we're horrified, but we're not surprised because we have seen this time and time again.
Nick, Australia appointed its first special envoy to combat anti-Semitism in 2024 in response to the clear rise in anti-Semitism, which was a step that AJC had long advocated for, as we have for similar roles around the world, and we continue to do so in meetings we have virtually every day. So for people who may not be familiar, can you just briefly explain why that role was created and what Special Envoy Siegel's mandate has been? And from your perspective, the warning signs were already visible well before this attack. How clearly do they point to the danger we're now facing?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to recognize, as we all do, unfortunately, is that anti-Semitism existed a long time before October 7. It predates any of us that are on this call, predates our parents. So this has been a longer conversation with the Australian government in terms of how do we address an undercurrent of anti-Semitism in generally in Western society. And like I said, we've been what I would call blessedly naive until the days immediately after October 7. In fact, October 8. I think many of you will have seen footage of the demonstration on the steps of the Sydney Opera House by the pro-Palestinians on October 8. The appointment of a special envoy to combat anti-Semitism was really what I would say a tactical appointment by the government in the wake of really strong, visible, terrible rise in anti-Semitism immediately post the October 7 events. The mandate there is focused on. I mean, if you read the terms of the government's terms of reference, the role of the special envoy is really to have two key stakeholders. One is obviously the Australian government, and it's to provide advice and certainly to be, let's call it a lightning rod to the Australian government, to all levels of government, between the community and government, and provide advice on strategies as to how to combat anti-Semitism. Some of that advice is obviously long-term and strategic. Some of it is more tactical, but really the terms of reference are to advise government. The second stakeholder is obviously the Jewish community. The role does not work without both stakeholders agreeing that this is important. You can't have a special envoy to combat anti-Semitism if the Jewish community doesn't support the role and the person. And you can't have a special envoy to combat anti-Semitism if the government is not willing to hear and respond. Now that's where one of the challenges is. So Gillian, over the course of effectively the first year, close to 12 months of that appointment, consulted extraordinarily broadly across the Jewish and broader community, and identified kind of the key points within, let's call it within Australian society that needed addressing. And that was very broad, ranging from tactical pieces like adoption of formal definitions of anti-Semitism to strategic pieces about engaging in specific sectors like the university sector or the healthcare sector or whatever the case may be. That report, officially called the Special Envoy's Plan to Combat Anti-Semitism, was delivered to the government and made public in July. And as you will have read broadly over the last week or two, or last 3 days definitely, we're still waiting for a formal response to that report from the government.
So Nick, that report, I want to follow up on that. That report had, correct me if I'm wrong, 49 concrete actions spanning education, universities, media, online platforms that within that plan that of course have not been endorsed or implemented. And I know a lot of our AJC community is wondering, what is the continued delay risk here?
So I do want to make one point here, and it's important to recognise that whilst we are, I think disappointed is probably an understatement, but let's just say whilst we are waiting for a formal government response, that hasn't held up any of the work in the report. So what we're not in is a position where we've delivered a report and we've sat here for the last 6 months twiddling our thumbs waiting for somebody to tell us, yes, you're ready to go. We're operating on the assumption that forgiveness is, we'll ask for forgiveness as opposed to permission. And so there is work ongoing in a number of those areas. I can pick a couple of them, obviously. In the university space, we've appointed what I would call an independent auditor to walk through university processes, to walk through university policies, to assess every university in Australia. And we have significantly fewer universities than in the US. We have about 40, in the low 40s recognised universities. to build report cards similar to the report card system operating in the US. We have worked directly with education departments and are about to launch um, programs to educate both teachers and school administrators as to the nuances of anti-Semitism, and help them build, let's call it, school curricula. I can go through all 49. I'm not going to. I can go through all 49, but in reality, we have continued work apace on those areas. There are certain areas that absolutely require government buy-in, and there are certain areas that actually require whole of society buy-in as well. Let's not lose sight of the fact that what we've experienced is a breakdown of civil discourse, and that's consistent across the Western world. Unfortunately, we've experienced a breakdown of civil discourse, and it's incumbent on leaders of all stripes, not just the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, but our state leaders, our civic leaders, leaders of institutions, leaders of business, community leaders, faith leaders. It's incumbent on leaders of all stripes to change the tone of the conversation. And that sounds really, I know, soft and very, unicorns and rainbows. But in reality, this environment does not arise suddenly. This is a continued trajectory and a continuum of a breakdown of civil discourse in Western society. So there are parts of that plan that call for a change in the way all of our leaders engage with this topic. That's not something that the government can stand up and endorse or not endorse, but it's certainly something that the government can take on and own their part of, and acknowledge that, simple conversations, to Joel's point, acknowledgement of impacts on individual communities, and lead the conversation on what is acceptable on our streets, what is acceptable conversations in our civic spaces, whether that be universities or professional associations. That can absolutely be led by government. So tragically, I think it's taken the events of Sunday for a number of members of government to realise that they're behind the eight ball on this, and I'm hopeful we will start seeing formal responses very, very, very quickly. It's obviously going to do nothing for the 15 people who have lost their lives or the 30-something people that are in hospital. It's too little, too late. But it's got to start somewhere. And so we will see. I'm hopeful. I've got to be careful in couching this. I'm hopeful we will start seeing some very concrete buy-in from different areas of civic leadership around the country over the next few days. Like I said, that's not only federal government. There's state government, there's police, there's universities, there's all sorts of engagement going on there.
Joel, following up on that, what, in your opinion, does a serious whole of government response actually look like?
You know what? I'll give you a list. It's irrelevant because they're not going to do it. We need to have conversations. We need to have hard conversations here that an ideologically bent Prime Minister isn't willing to have. We need to have a conversation about anti-Semitism, systemic anti-Semitism in the Australian Muslim community. Don't we all remember the two nurses last year, that threatened to kill Jewish patients? We're not talking about the fact that we probably have an anti-Semitism problem amongst the Australian Muslim community. There needs to be more monitoring and surveillance of hate preachers, Islamic hate preachers. That's not going to happen. We need to have an audit of their education syllabus. That's not going to happen. There were systemic failures in terms of the monitoring system. The father and son duo, the son was on a ASIO, which is like our FBI, an ASIO watch list, let off, and they didn't cross-reference the fact that he was living with his dad, who had six assault weapons that were licensed to him. And just to give context, we do not have the saturation of guns in this country as to what you have in yours. So to be in a city and have six guns is not normal. But the security agencies didn't pick it up because the security agencies weren't taking it seriously enough. The security agencies didn't put enough resources. It just come to light now, just last night, Australia time, that there were only 3 police officers at Bondi Beach. Now, just to give you an idea, so it was a warm afternoon. Bondi would have been packed with thousands of people on the beach, in the water, in the pubs and the clubs all around, in the restaurants. But there were 1,000 Jewish people there, and they put 3 police officers there to the context of everything that we've warned them about and everything that they should have been aware about. It's a failure of policing. It's a failure of the intelligence communities. And there's a failure of the political class to take it seriously. The problem with, look, Nick is 100% right. His work and Jill's work will continue. But the government, the report cards is a perfect example. So there's been movement on the report cards for university, but before the events of Sunday, the government, if it was to agree on some type of report card system for the universities, would want to probably dump the story on a Friday afternoon, no less be criticized by the intersectionalized left or the Islamic community of Australia that they were being too good to the Jews. When Jill's report was released in July, it was just blanket coverage by Labor MPs, by Greens MPs, and by members of our own community denouncing the report to say, oh, this is just an attempt by Jill and others to quash debate on Israel. Well, no, it wasn't. It was to protect Jews from exactly what we predicted was going to happen. It wasn't about quashing debate on Israel. It just happens to be that language on Israel invading all of our social spaces in Australia had made this country a very unsafe space and place for Jews. So what really needs to happen in the immediacy of it is that they'll throw money at us for security, for instance. But currently now, I send my kids to a Jewish day school. I pay a security level for their security. They gave us $25 million after the weeks after October 7, $25 million to upgrade security for Jewish institutions and installations. They also gave $25 million to the Muslim community. They didn't specify as to what was it for, but God forbid, Chas v'chalila, they gave $1 to the Jew, but they didn't give $1 to the Muslim. I'm talking about 2 weeks after the events of October 7, before any IDF soldiers had their shoes in Gaza, weeks before, right? So this government needs to act and act quickly. Now, if they are to adopt or respond to Jill's report, I dare say, unfortunately, that they will continue on their pathway of the conflation between anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. They appointed Jill, but they couldn't not appoint an Islamophobia envoy at the same time. Jill releases her report. Senior Minister Jason Clare, Education Minister, is asked, Mr. Clare, when are you going to respond to Jill's report? The Islamophobia envoy is due to release his report in the coming weeks. I think it's just fair. It's fair that we just compare the two together, and we all lives matter. The Jewish community. We can't look at anti-Semitism in isolation. We need to look at it with anti-Palestinianism, with Islamophobia, with all other forms of racism. The Human Rights Commission is the actual institution and body set up by federal government to look after issues like this. And it's still now 2 years of the explosion of anti-Semitism, is yet to hand down a report on anti-Semitism and is yet to look at the problems of anti-Semitism in isolation. It will only look at them in terms of anti-Semitism, anti-Palestinianism, Islamophobia, and all other kinds of racism. This is the position of the current government that allowed the atmosphere to continue, that essentially directly led to blood being spilled in Bondi. Now, these things are very clear. Upgrades to security. Jewish community shouldn't have to be paying for it. The $25 million they gave to us, you can't use that for armed guards. Only physical structures, they said. We have to pay for our own armed guards? Are you serious? They should be appropriating and saying for the next 5 to 10 years, all your synagogues, all your shuls, all paid for. Everything that you need is paid for, right? If you guys want armed police cars, if you want police cars out there just for visuals, I just sent my daughter to a Jewish kinder yesterday and there were no police cars out there. And think about what I'm just saying to you. I'm saying I want the police car there. This is the society that we live in, where I'm actually asking for a physical police presence to protect my 5-year-old daughter from harm. This is where we've got. And he still, and his colleagues still cannot grapple with the gravity of the problem. They need to act swiftly. They need to go to their own arms and their own institutions. No longer can you refuse service to a Zionist. We are going to prosecute people that spew hate speech against your people. And we're not going to tiptoe around the fact that the central problem here is Israel. I, for one, as a Jewish leader, will no longer talk about anti-Semitism in isolation from Israel, because it's the rhetoric and language on Israel that motivates the people to come and kill us. Those two terrorists were motivated by what was going on in Israel, what motivated them to come and kill us. So if they had Israel on their minds, why are we acting as though that it has nothing to do with the vitriolic binary nature of the pro-Palestinian advocacy movement? So overnight, what we want immediately, if you ask any Jew, what do you want? What do you want? No more protests. No more protests. No more no-go zones for Jews. I can't, for 2 years, cannot take my kids to downtown Melbourne for 2 years on a Sunday because of the pro-Palestinian marches, because of the violent nature of them. No more. Because that is an acceptance of the connection between the two. And until the Prime Minister is willing to do that, this is going to happen again.
And I know, Joel, we hear your frustration, and those of us that heard you on our global forum stage just about 6 months ago heard the same message, and it's devastating that we're here again hearing that same message after the 15 lives have been lost.
Look, Daniel, look, on a personal note, I feel a huge amount of responsibility from my own failures. It's my job to interact with government at all levels. It's my job to build the relationships, to maintain the relationships. It's my job to get them to understand. And I failed. And it kills me that I spent time thinking about what else could have been done to through the pleading and the begging that this was going to happen. And all they could think about is, what is the incentive for these Jews? Oh, they don't want to hear the vitriol against Israel. They have this other ulterior motive. It was always about our personal safety. And still now, when we've been proven right that, our concerns were all there and it was going to lead to this, still, the response from government still not where it needs to be.
It's our job too, Joel, at AJC, and I know I'm going to be mindful of the time, but I want to get to another question on that topic to you, Hannah, before I turn it back to you, Claire, to answer some audience questions. And I know just by reading some of the Q&A that's coming in through the chat that a lot of people, a lot of the hundreds of people on are asking what can we do? What is AJC doing? Where can we have meaningful advocacy that will help Joel and his team out, help Nick in the Special Envoy's office out? So Hannah, if you can just speak briefly about what AJC is doing now. I know the team mobilized when we woke up to the horrific news on Sunday morning. We were immediately in touch with Joel and his team and others in Australia. But what is AJC doing now? How are we using our global advocacy network to push for concrete action in Australia and beyond?
Yeah, we're reaching across the gamut to U.S. government, to the White House, to Congress, to diplomats both here in the U.S. and through our global network abroad. In Australia, we're calling, just as Nick and Joel have highlighted, for a real comprehensive plan. Australia is a signatory to the U.S.-led global guidelines for countering anti-Semitism. There are clear and effective ways to combat anti-Semitism that are laid out there, and we are urging Australia to act on these guidelines that it said it endorsed in July 2024. So adopt the Special Envoy's report to combat anti-Semitism online, to ensure anti-Semitism education, to beef up physical security. But just to Joel's point, as much as the community needs more physical security, more law enforcement, and all of that, we also we don't want a society, right, where Jews can only be Jews behind locked doors, behind armed guards. They have to be able to live Jews freely in society. This is the society that Australia has had until recent years and wants to return to, and the government needs to act so much more aggressively in order to get back to a place where anti-Semitism isn't tolerated. And I think the last point that we're really pushing in our communications is that government officials need to speak out immediately, unequivocally, whenever there are incidents of anti-Semitism, and particularly so when there are incidents of anti-Zionism, because it's too easy to make things political and to hide behind these questions of Israel, to Joel's point. They have to be unequivocal in their response.
I think if I can add to that, Daniel,
Please, Nick.
we tiptoe around this notion of free speech. And make no mistake, free speech is extraordinarily important. It's the underpinning of a free society. And I do subscribe to this notion that you can't arrest your way to social cohesion, right? This isn't about what you make legal and illegal. We can always draw those lines and redraw those lines, and there'll be people who think we've gone too far and people who think we haven't gone far enough. I think, yes, we absolutely need to advocate for where those lines are drawn from a legal perspective. But as Hannah's pointed out, there are very clear lines about what we need our leaders to stand up and say they accept. It's not about whether people go to jail. Yes, there's absolutely no doubt that people need to go to jail. And from my perspective, it's actually less about going to jail and more about getting expelled from the country. And there are mechanisms that need to be activated for that to happen. But it's very clear that our leaders need to draw an immediate line about what they accept and expect from community behavior. All right? It's not about arresting more people. We can always arrest more people, make no mistake, but you can never arrest enough, to be honest.
Thank you, Nick. And I know I saw our CEO, Ted Deutsch, join, so maybe we'll have time to get to questions at the end, but maybe first, Ted, if you are there, I will toss it over to you.
Thanks. Daniel, thanks. And there you go. It's good to be with you, Joel, Nick. It's really good to see you both. I'm going to be really brief. I heard some of the conversation. I'm joining via Zoom from a just completed meeting of the Bipartisan Task Force to combat anti-Semitism in the U.S. House. I'm going from here to a press conference that members of the House of Representatives are holding in support of the Jewish community in Australia, calling on the government of Australia to actually take action. Joel, the notes I keep getting, you're a friend. I want everyone to know how much we value the relationship that we have and how hard this is for us. And everyone's texting me talking about how upset you are on this call. We understand that and we feel that. And having had the opportunity to go to Canberra with you and to have meeting after meeting there and in Melbourne and in Sydney, where we echoed your very powerful statements that what was happening on the ground could and would likely lead to violence and potentially death. It was powerful. The warnings were clear. And at this point, our message is not only do we need to stand with the Jewish community of Australia, but we have to make sure that the government of Australia does everything that it can to make sure that something like this never happens again, and that countries around the world understand that failure to take consequential action against anti-Semitism can, and as we sadly saw at Bondi Beach, it will lead to violence. So I wanted to join in between these meetings just to express our sympathy, our solidarity, our strong conviction to stand with Australia's Jewish community in every way that we can. And that includes making sure that the U.S. government at all levels, including the administration. I spoke last night with Yehuda Kaplan, the incoming anti-Semitism envoy. Every level of the United States government pushing the Australian government to make this the priority that it needs to be. Last thing I'll say is this, and I don't, and for Joel and Nick, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. The Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of Australia, in responding to this, quickly pivoted. The conversation quickly pivoted to guns. I watched the entire press conference on Sunday, and the questions over and over were, well, what do we think the motives are here? What could the motives possibly be? Now the conversation has shifted to terrorism. The Jewish community has been terrorized around the world. The motives are clear. It is to attack Jews because they're Jews. We stand with you. We stand with the Jewish community around the world, and we are pushing as hard as we can at every point in this government in our country to make sure that our government is standing with you and is pushing your government to take the action necessary to keep Jews safe. Nobody should be afraid to gather together as a community and feel that there's a target on our back. I am sorry that the community in Sydney was targeted, and we will work together as hard as we can to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again. It's really, really good to see you, Joel. Nick, thank you for the work that you're doing, and Daniel and Hannah especially. Thank you for the opportunity to join today.
Thank you for your care, and thank you for your friendship, Ted. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Daniel. I need to run to. I need to run to this press conference so members of Congress can stand up and be counted on this issue. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks,
And
Ted.
thanks for all who have joined. I know there's a big crowd that's joined with us. We need to stand together as a community. We need to be bold. We can't back down. The world needs to understand that we have the same right as everyone else to live freely as who we are. So thanks, gentlemen. I'm Yisrael Chai.
Thank you, Ted.
Thanks,
And
Ted.
Claire, I think we do have a few minutes, hopefully, to get to a few audience questions because I know a significant number have come in through the chat. So Joel, Nick, and Hannah, if you'll allow, we'll try and get to a couple questions.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm going to ask two at the same time. The first is from Jean Germanovich, who's asking, in the days since the attack, we've seen massive disinformation and conspiracy theory campaigns. How much of it is organic versus organized? And Nick, how is the Special Envoy's team working to counter this? And the next question from Alexis Fredman, following the attack, what non-governmental responses are most needed in Australia, and what can broader civil society, so media, educators, allies, etc., do to better address anti-Semitism? And maybe Nick, I'll start with you.
Sure. So you're right. The conspiracy theories, the misinformation, the disinformation has been rife. I think some of it is natural after an event like this, where you see people just spreading whatever comes to mind in their feed, and let's just park that for a minute. That tends to be the nature of these horrific events, and talk about the malicious misinformation as opposed to the mistaken misinformation. It's a real challenge, and I would argue that a significant chunk of the malicious misinformation is organized, is premeditated, is ready to roll after events like these, and in fact can be directly attributed to events like these happening in the first place. Right? The online space has become a toxic swamp of hate. And so, you ask what can be done about it. I'd say that's probably the hardest question that we have in front of us right now, for a few reasons. The first is, we know that a number of the online platforms pride themselves on what they call free speech. Obviously, we would disagree. We would call it hate speech. And so getting a significant, substantial, and meaningful response from the online platforms themselves is challenging. Now, there is a global network of special envoys, as you may be aware. It's not only the US and Australia that have special envoys, there's 30-something countries around the world that have special envoys. And it's a specific project of that special envoys group to engage with the platforms and build strategies to counter hate. But I wish I could say it was having an effect, and I wish I could say it was successful, but it's not. The different platforms, depending on which platform, whether you're talking about meta platforms or TikTok or X or whatever the case may be, all have different responses and different strategies, but it's not working. In my opinion, we can talk to the end of the earth about things like moderators versus community notes and things like that. And if you're not aware of what those are, it's not particularly relevant. What we need is direct countering to misinformation. I think too often I see in my feed comments like, oh, the shooters were ex-IDF soldiers, right? Which popped up within minutes. This is a false flag operation by Israel. We actually need people of credibility, wherever they see those things pop up, directly counter them. We can't let them sit there, right? So it might feel like a drop in the ocean, but we cannot let the disinformation and misinformation sit there unchallenged. That's the first thing. The second thing is we need to continue, both as a community and our regulators, governments, commissioners, all of that sort of thing. We need to continue to put pressure on these platforms to understand the role they have to play in social cohesion and how far short they are falling of community standards. That's a long-term thing. I can't put my hand on my heart and tell you what change that is going to impact, but we cannot let this continue to go. It's probably the question that keeps me awake the most at night, which is, what are we doing around online hate? Australia, every country has different strategies. Europe and UK have different laws and strategies. Australia has just introduced, for example, and this is unrelated to anti-Semitism, has just introduced a ban on social media for those under 16. The jury's out as to whether that's going to work. Every country has a different approach. The problem is these platforms are global. They're largely unregulated. They're largely unmoderated, and hate seems to be winning.
Joel, I don't know if you want to. I know
Just
there's a lot of
really,
questions. Sure.
yeah, just really quickly. I'll keep it brief. Arsen Ostrowski, my colleague, is one of the subjects of the majority of the misinformation. There's a deep fake AI image going around of him getting makeup on his face, before the massacre happened. That's obviously not true, and there's an abundance of evidence that shows that that's clearly not true. So if the platforms are notified of this directly, whether or not it's the Australian office or the international office or through some type of Jewish or Israel liaison, which they all have, if they are aware of it and they don't take it down, and then for some reason some idiot comes and finds Arsen on the streets of Sydney and attacks him because they think that he's part of this whole, Jewish cabal conspiracy, get the blood on their hands. They're legally culpable. If you've told them that it's fake and there's an abundance of evidence to say that it's fake and they don't take it down and something happens to him because of it, they're legally culpable. Now, let's accept the fact that the social media platforms can remove anything they want as quickly as they want. God forbid your white t-shirt is a little bit see-through and a little bit, risque. Good luck getting that on Meta. Good luck getting that on Instagram or Facebook. It's removed. The tiniest little bit of nudity is removed immediately. You're telling me that they can't identify through their algorithms any false picture of arson and remove it immediately? Or at the very least, put a disclaimer on it? They are culpable in fomenting the atmosphere that allows this stuff and this misinformation to occur. And unfortunately, Australia is obviously not immune, but the United States is not immune either. These Candace Owens and Tucker Carlsons and these conspiracy theories and the embrace of Nick Fuentes, this is not just an American issue. This is a global issue. In terms of civil society, very quickly, no more of this. No more of turning your back. No more of, not my problem. It's up to government to do. Jews have been persecuted for 2 years, and you have to be living under a rock in this country if you didn't know about it. Civil society needs to take responsibility for its own actions and not just allow the Jew to defend themselves. I'll give you an example. Last week in Melbourne, a rabbi and his daughter were accosted on a tram in Melbourne by a pro-Palestinian protester and said, go to the gas chambers, go to the gas ovens. You need to go to the ovens, she says. And they confronted her. They got their camera out and they confronted her. But the problem is all the other people on the tram just sat there, just watched. We need to rise up. We need to stand up. We need to say that this is a problem that we do not want in our country. So we're going to take our own individual responsibility and we're going to stamp it out itself. Civil society institutions need to accept the fact that we have a problem and then they need to fix it. No more, no more, and no more.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Hannah. I know that we hear your frustration, your anger. I so appreciate your candor on today's call, and I echo what Ted said. We are here to work with you to do this work. Joel, I can only hope that at Global Forum next year, you sit on our stage and you say, look what we were able to accomplish together because of the work of the Jewish community in Australia, the work of the global Jewish community of AJC, the work of the Special Envoy. And Nick, I can hope that we continue to work with Jillian and all of the Special Envoys around the world to say that this should happen never again. We are in this fight together. We will continue to advocate for all of the ways that Hannah mentioned and more. And for those of you listening on today's call, we will continue to provide those resources so that you at home or at work, wherever you are also able to have meaningful advocacy and make meaningful change. Joel, for you, Nick, for you with your community, and for the global Jewish community around the world. We're in this together. AJC will continue to be a partner and is here to help with you. Thank you to everybody for joining us. And with that, Claire, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you all for sharing your expertise on today's AJC Advocacy Anywhere program, and thank you to our global audience for tuning in. At a time of heightened anti-Semitism, the role of the U.S. Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism is needed more urgently than ever. Join AJC in urging the Senate to confirm Yehuda Kaplan in this critical position at ajc.org/confirmkaplan or go to the Take Action page on ajc.org. And to stay up to date on these issues and AJC's work around the globe, make sure to follow AJC on social media at AJC Global. Wishing those of you celebrating a very happy Hanukkah. Thank you again and goodbye.